The photo of my son and daughter-in-law sipping champagne on a Mediterranean cruise deck made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped my phone. I had just given them $18,000 to cover Elizabeth's medical bills. 6 days later, there they were, smiling, tan, and surrounded by everyone in the family, except me. If you've ever sacrificed everything for your children only to be repaid with betrayal, you'll understand why this story still makes my blood run cold. Don't forget to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because what you're about to hear isn't just revenge, it's justice served ice cold. My name is Hannah Smith, but everyone calls me Hannah. I'm 64 years old, a retired teacher, and until 6 months ago, I thought I'd raised a good man. My son Samuel was my pride. I raised him alone after his father died in a construction accident when he was 10. We didn't have much, but I made sure he always had what he needed: a full lunchbox, clean clothes, and love that could fill an entire house. When he met Elizabeth, I tried to like her. She was polite at first, the kind of woman who hugged you just long enough to leave her perfume on your clothes. But as soon as the ring was on her finger, everything changed. Elizabeth didn't just marry my son, she took ownership of him. Suddenly, every visit had to be scheduled. Every conversation went through her, and every decision, big or small, was hers to approve. I kept quiet. I told myself Samuel was happy. And that was enough. Then came the call. It was a rainy Wednesday morning when Samuel's voice trembled through the phone. "Mom, Liz's medical bills came in higher than we expected. Insurance isn't covering half. We're drowning. Could you help?" There was no hesitation. Not for my boy. I transferred $18,000 that very day. Everything I'd saved for house repairs and a small trip I'd been planning. He promised to pay me back once things settled. For 6 days, I didn't hear a word. Not a text, not a thank you, nothing. Then, on the 7th morning, my niece forwarded me a photo. It was from Facebook. My entire family. Samuel, Elizabeth, my brother, his wife, even the cousins, all smiling on the deck of a cruise ship. The caption? "Family vacation of a lifetime. Couldn't be happier. Heart." No mention of me. No invite. No message. Just a public post showing how they used my money to toast champagne under the Italian sun while I sat home eating soup from a can. At first, I laughed. The kind of laugh that isn't really laughter. It's shock dressed up as sanity. Then came the shaking. The kind of shaking that starts in your fingers and spreads like fire to your heart. When Elizabeth answered my call, her tone was syrupy sweet. "Oh, hi, Hannah. You saw the photos? Isn't it beautiful here?" "Beautiful," I said, my voice trembling. "How's your health?" She giggled. "Oh, you mean my bills? Oh, silly me. It was just stress-related. I feel so much better now that we're away." Stress-related? $18,000 of my life savings gone because she needed a little vacation to recover. I wanted to scream, to throw my phone, to curse the heavens, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled through my tears and said softly, "I hope you're enjoying yourself. You both deserve it." That's when my revenge began to take shape. I spent the next 2 days sitting by my window, watching the snow fall, sipping lukewarm tea. But my mind was racing. For 64 years, I'd been everyone's safety net, the dependable one, the helper, the fixer. But this time, I wouldn't fix their mess. I'd make one. It started small. I logged into my old laptop and began scrolling through the documents I'd stored over the years: receipts, transfers, account records. Samuel might have thought he was clever, but he'd used my joint savings account for their emergency. That meant I still had access. When I saw the cruise payment confirmation from the travel agency, I noticed something that made my pulse quicken. The booking was under my name. Apparently, when they'd booked the tickets, they used my account to pay, and my name automatically filled the primary traveler field. They never bothered to change it, which meant, legally speaking, I was the lead passenger on that entire trip. And if something were to go wrong with that reservation, like a cancellation or a credit card dispute, every refund, every voucher, every rebooking notice would come directly to me. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, dangerous smile forming on my lips. By the time they'd docked in Barcelona, they'd have no idea what was waiting for them. But that wasn't all, because revenge, as I was quickly remembering, is best served strategically, not just cold. When the realization landed, the reservation was in my name, it felt like a lit match in my palm. Not painful, not yet, just potential. Heat. Possibility. I sat very still for a long time, watching the snow melt into gray puddles outside my kitchen window. The house felt too big and too quiet. I poured myself another cup of tea and opened the old document folder I kept under the loose floorboard in the study, the one place no one ever thought to look. It was a ridiculous, primal comfort to have my files there. Bank statements, copies of checks, the printout of that $18,000 transfer. Proof. My proof. I called the travel agency first, the number printed in the confirmation email. The woman who answered sounded young and bright, like someone who thought the world owed her sparkles. I swallowed my anger and put on my most reasonable voice. "Hello, this is Hannah Smith," I said. "I'm calling about booking ref 7C4421. The reservation shows me as the primary traveler. I need to speak to someone in customer support. Now." There was a polite pause, the sound of keys clacking. "Yes, Miss Smith, I can look that up. One moment, please." The minutes ticked by like heartbeats. I didn't want drama. I wanted structure. I wanted the paper trail set down, neat and undeniable. A supervisor came on the line. "Mrs. Smith, I see the reservation. How can I help?" He had a tone that assumed good faith. "I didn't authorize that trip," I said, soft but firm. "My account was charged without my explicit consent. I want you to freeze the booking pending an investigation. Also, please remove any primary contact details associated with my phone and email so I can't possibly be billed again while this is being resolved." There was a fluster of professional language, a check of policy, and then the softest sound of a rule being followed. "I understand, ma'am. We can flag the reservation and open an investigation. If you'd like to dispute the charge formally, we will need documentation." I sent the documentation. The bank transfer confirmation, the email from Samuel asking for help, the screenshot of the cruise payment. I wrote a concise narrative. Payment was made under duress for supposed medical bills. I demanded a refund. I asked for the booking to be held. It was the right move, not theatrical, not criminal, procedural. Paperwork is a kind of power. While the agency opened their internal case, I called the cruise line directly. I got a customer service representative in Miami, then a manager in reservations, then when it mattered, a woman in compliance who used the word fraud without blinking. I explained everything again. The booking under my name, the unauthorized charge, the social media photos showing the party on the deck. I asked for nothing dramatic, only a temporary hold on services linked to my name, and a formal copy of the onboard receipts. "Mrs. Smith," the woman said finally, We take claims of unauthorized charges very seriously. We will flag the guest account and put the booking on temporary review. If it is determined that this was a fraudulent use of your funds, we will refund any charges that are found to be unauthorized. It was bureaucracy, yes, but bureaucracy moves people. It forces companies to write things down in black and white. It smells dull, but it's effective. While they investigated, I did the other small, important things. I called my bank. The bank listened, incredulous, sympathetic, protocol-led, and opened a dispute on the transaction. I asked for timelines and paper. I stopped thinking like the old shame-heavy mother who apologizes for asking for what is hers. I demanded it. I also made 2 quieter calls, one to my lawyer, Patricia, and one to my sister, Claire. Patricia advised a cautious legal approach. Never lie, never dramatize, let the records do the talking. Claire, who lived 2 towns over and had always been my small voice of fire, offered to go to the police station and file a report if the agency dragged its feet. I told Claire not to. Escalation was a tool to be used sparingly. Over the next 48 hours, things started to unfurl, but not in the way I dreamed. The travel agency wrote back, carefully phrased. They had flagged the booking, opened an inquiry, and recommended a hold. The cruise line confirmed my name was flagged and certain on-board privileges could not be transferred without my consent. The bank placed a provisional hold on disputed funds while the investigation proceeded. It was a tiny, bureaucratic seamstress threading a new life. The hold meant the travel agency could not issue further refunds, onboard credits, or name changes without my say-so. It meant the couple's plans, the redeemed spa packages, the splashy anniversary dinner prepaid in my account, hung in unofficial limbo. Samuel called the next morning. His voice was unsteady. "Mom, what did you do? Liz says our cards were charged, that you overreacted." He assumed panic, not calculation, and the tone told me he still thought of me as the frantic parent who would fold. "I followed the paper, Sam," I said. "The charge is under my name. I asked for an investigation." No anger, just fact. "Please, Mom, they're on the ship. They'll be fine. You don't want a scene." He didn't understand. Most children don't. They can't imagine someone older using procedure like a scalpel instead of a hammer. "That's not my aim," I said. "If it was an emergency you paid, I want to be repaid. If it wasn't, that's a different matter." I heard his hesitation, not denial, but the scent of guilt. He said, "Okay," and the line grew thin. He would call back, he always did. He would call back when he needed something else. While they were afloat in the Mediterranean, toasting under the sun, the bureaucratic tide pulled. The travel agency wrote to say they couldn't legally move forward on any changes until the dispute closed. The cruise line politely explained onboard amenities reserved under my name might be subject to cancellation should the investigation find the charge unauthorized. The words read dryly, but their effect was clear. Some dinners would not be confirmed, excursions paid by my account might be subject to hold, and the VIP treatment could be quietly rescinded. But I wanted more than financial inconvenience. I wanted them to feel the social pressure that comes when your shine dulls and your choices are exposed. So I did something both simple and delicious. I called the family group chat, not to rant, not to beg, but to let facts be public. "Good morning," I typed, keeping the tone almost casual. "For anyone traveling on booking 7C4421, please note there is an ongoing billing investigation tied to this reservation. The primary account holder has filed a dispute. Any refunds or credits may be delayed. If you were given assurances that everything was paid for, you may wish to confirm with your provider directly." I hit send and watched as the little gray ticks became blue. The silence afterward was a small, satisfying thing. Within an hour, the chatter began. My brother messaged, "What? We didn't know." My niece, "Is this true?" Samuel's name glowed as typing, then nothing. "Elizabeth?" She blocked the chat.
a private, cheap safeguard, and also a loud signal. 3 days into the cruise, the first crack appeared on social media. The photo album Samuel had posted was now annotated by comments from relatives who hadn't been told the truth. The cousin asking, "How is Aunt Hannah? I thought she helped with the bills." And the tone shifted. People are more complicated than they pretend in photos. Even in the sun, a shadow can fall. The travel agency called to say they were still investigating, that they had not found conclusive proof the payment was malicious, but protocol required caution. "Mrs. Smith, the funds are provisionally frozen," the agent said. "This means the passengers will still travel, but certain vendor charges may require cash or card confirmation on board." Translation: the champagne might still splash, the billed dinners might be reassigned to other names. The extras they enjoyed as a family could suddenly require another source of funds. They would notice, they would squabble. They always did when privilege smudged. 2 nights later, an email arrived in my inbox from an onboard guest services manager, short, professional, with a line that made my chest ache and hum with satisfaction. "Dear Mrs. Smith, due to the flagged status on your booking, some prepaid amenities were suspended pending resolution." Attached were lists, spa credits, private shore excursions, a special table reservation at the captain's gala. My name still sat on the receipts. Their chairs at the best tables were no longer guaranteed. I sat with that email for a long time, feeling the justice like warmth. Not cruelty, not loud or savage. A leveled field. They had toasted without me, and now some of what they toasted would be out of reach. At night, I replayed Elizabeth's voice in my head, silky and false. "We're away, Hannah. I feel so much better." My anger had tempered into a steady, cold resolve. I was not trying to bankrupt them. I was simply making sure their choices had consequences.
When I finally went to bed that night, the house smelled of lemon cleaner and old paper. The world felt less like a betrayal and more like a puzzle I could solve. The snow outside had turned to wet slush, dragging the light into the gutters. I slept like someone who had turned the lock and found the key. The cruise would end, the investigation would conclude one way or another, but in the meantime, the celebration on that sunlit deck had a new soundtrack, the soft, bureaucratic language of pending review. And that, I decided, would be enough for now.
The cruise had been at sea for 4 days when the cracks started to show. It began with a video, a short, shaky clip sent to the family group chat by my niece, Chloe. Aunt Hannah," she wrote, "you might want to see this." The video showed Elizabeth standing at the ship's front desk, her designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Behind her, passengers queued with luggage. Her voice, sharp, nasal, and entitled, carried over the crowd. "What do you mean my spa appointment is canceled? It was prepaid, under Hannah Smith." The staff member behind the counter, calm and professional, replied something about account verification and pending refund investigation. The camera panned briefly, and there was Samuel, standing beside her, red-faced and stiff, clutching his phone like a lifeline. "Oh no," I whispered. "They really did record this." Within minutes, the video spread through family chat. Cousins started whispering. My sister Claire texted me, "Is this your doing?" I just replied, "No, dear. It's simply the truth catching up." That evening, I sat by my fireplace, the crackle of burning logs mixing with the faint hum of satisfaction in my chest. I hadn't meant to humiliate them publicly, but I couldn't deny the poetic justice of it. For years, Elizabeth had curated her image of perfection, the high society woman, the doting daughter-in-law, the charity gala queen. She'd worn my help like a hidden corset, tight enough to shape her life, but never acknowledged. Now the seams were splitting in front of an audience. 2 days later, I got a call from Samuel. He sounded exhausted, furious, and a little scared. "Mom, you have to call the agency and fix this. They're saying we might have to pay double for the shore excursion."
I kept my tone calm. You paid for the trip, remember? Or was that another bill you forgot to mention? He sighed heavily. I know how this looks, okay? But it was supposed to be a surprise. Elizabeth said you wouldn't have wanted to come anyway. A surprise, I repeated slowly. Interesting choice of word for theft. That's not fair, Mom. We didn't steal anything.
Didn't you? I said, cutting him off gently. You lied. You told me Elizabeth was sick. You took my money for a cruise. And you think the word family erases the receipt? The silence stretched. Then I heard something. A faint sniffle. Samuel wasn't a crier, not even as a child. He finally said, barely above a whisper, I didn't know she was going to post those pictures. After that call, I knew something had shifted. Guilt had finally found him. Small, crawling, but alive. But guilt alone wasn't enough. I wanted change. I wanted accountability. So I did what every underestimated woman learns to do. I built a story. I printed out the receipts, the emails, and the screenshots. Then I wrote an open letter, not for social media, but for our family newsletter. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't emotional. It was factual, elegant, surgical. A brief note of gratitude. I began. Thank you to those who sent well wishes for my son and daughter-in-law's trip. Unfortunately, that trip was funded under false pretenses, money meant for medical emergencies. I have since filed for reimbursement and reported the misuse. I hope this serves as a gentle reminder. Integrity is not measured by how much champagne we can pour, but how we treat those who fill the glass. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. Everyone knew. By the time the newsletter circulated, the calls started rolling in. Claire called first, furious and proud all at once. Damn it, Hannah, that was art. Then my cousin Ruth called laughing. So that's why Liz has been deleting her posts. Word spreading faster than their ship can sail. Even old family friends messaged me privately telling me they admired how I handled it with grace. Grace, such a small word for something that felt so much bigger. But while the social tide turned in my favor, the practical one kept flowing too. The cruise line completed their investigation. They confirmed in writing that the funds had been applied under misleading pretenses by secondary passengers. Translation: Samuel and Elizabeth had misused the booking. The refund would come directly to me. When I got that email, I sat in silence for a long time. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just felt something steady return to my chest, something that had been missing since the day I sent that $18,000. Control. I withdrew the money, transferred it into a new account, and marked the transaction memo line, Lesson learned. Still, there was one more thing I needed. Not revenge, but balance. When Samuel and Elizabeth finally came home from their dream cruise, they didn't call me for a week. I expected that. Guilt takes time to thaw. But I was patient. On the 9th day, I saw their car pull into my driveway. Elizabeth came first, wearing her big sunglasses again, but this time they couldn't hide the shame. Samuel followed, shoulders heavy, hands trembling slightly as he held out an envelope. Mom, we wanted to apologize in person. I didn't invite them in. Not yet. Elizabeth spoke first. It got out of hand, she said. I just wanted a break. We didn't think you'd find out. Oh, sweetie, I said softly. You thought money was anonymous? The woman who taught you how to write a budget? She dropped her gaze. We're sorry. Samuel cleared his throat. Mom, I shouldn't have lied. I'll pay you back in installments.
I've already talked to the bank. That's not necessary, I said calmly. I've already been refunded. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Elizabeth blinked. Refunded? How? I tilted my head. The same way you booked it. In my name. Her mouth opened, then closed again, like a fish gasping for air. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as realization dawned. The ship had been hers for 7 days, but the victory had always been mine. Samuel looked up, eyes red. Mom, why didn't you just call us first? I did, I said quietly. You didn't pick up. And even if you had, would you have listened? He didn't answer. Elizabeth muttered something about family drama and overreaction, but her voice cracked halfway through. I finally stepped aside. Come in, I said. We might as well finish this conversation like adults. We sat in the living room where I used to read bedtime stories to Samuel. The same clock ticked on the wall, steady and impartial. I handed Samuel a folder, the receipts, the dispute letters, the cruise company's response. He leafed through them, each page turning heavier than the last. By the end, his hands were shaking. You really went through all this? Yes, I said, because you taught me something, Samuel. You taught me that even love needs boundaries, and sometimes boundaries need paperwork. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw not arrogance or guilt, but understanding. Elizabeth stood up suddenly. I can't do this, she snapped. You've humiliated us enough. I smiled faintly. Oh, Elizabeth, if you think I did this to humiliate you, you still don't get it. I did this to remind you that decency still matters. She glared, but her power was gone. All that remained was her reflection in the polished floor, smaller, sharper, more fragile than before. Samuel squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, Mom. And this time, I believed him. That night, after they left, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window watching their car disappear down the dark road. Outside, snow was falling again, soft, slow, quiet. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even vengeful. I was free. Because forgiveness, I realized, isn't always about letting go. Sometimes it's about reclaiming what was taken, your voice, your dignity, your name. And mine was finally back where it belonged.
2 weeks passed after that uneasy apology. For most people, that would have been enough. An I'm sorry, a refund, a promise to do better. But I'd learned the hard way that words are like sugar, sweet at first, but they dissolve fast. I wanted something lasting, something that couldn't be erased with a phone call or a social media post, something that made everyone remember, not just Samuel and Elizabeth, but the entire family who had watched my generosity for years like it was an ATM with a smile. So when my sister Claire suggested hosting our annual family dinner, I smiled and said, Perfect! I'll host this year. Her eyes widened. You sure? After everything? Oh, I'm sure, I said, with a calm that made her lean back in her chair. I think it's time for a different kind of feast. The night of the dinner, my house looked radiant. Candles glowed against the mahogany table, soft jazz played in the background, and the aroma of roasted herbs filled the air. Every plate was polished, every glass shimmered, and at the center of it all, a stack of crisp, white envelopes, one for each family member. When they arrived, laughter filled the house. Cousins complimented the decor. Claire brought her famous lemon pie. Even Elizabeth smiled tightly, though her eyes darted nervously to the envelopes. Wow, Mom, Samuel said, sitting beside her. You went all out. I did. It's been a while since we all sat together, hasn't it? He nodded. Yeah, not since before the trip. Ah, yes.
I said, pouring him some wine, before the trip. The conversation carried on, small talk, polite laughter, awkward silences, but beneath the surface, everyone could feel it. Something was coming. Halfway through dinner, I raised my glass. I'd like to make a toast. To family, the ones who teach us patience, humility, and, occasionally, the fine art of revenge. The table chuckled, unsure if it was a joke. I smiled, letting the pause linger just long enough for tension to settle. Then I gestured to the envelopes. Go ahead, open them. Paper rustled, curious glances darted across the table. Each envelope contained a check, but not for money.
Instead, it was a donation receipt. A donation made in each family member's name to various charities. The note on each read, "In honor of the many times you forgot gratitude, I've redirected my gifts to those who still know its worth." The silence that followed was delicious. Elizabeth's face turned crimson. "Are you serious?" "Completely," I said, sipping my wine. "Your check, for instance, went to a women's shelter. They help single mothers rebuild their lives after betrayal." Claire covered her mouth, laughing quietly. "Oh, Hannah." Samuel looked at his note. "Mom, you donated my inheritance?" I tilted my head. "Correction, sweetheart. You can't inherit something that's already been spent on your vacations." A few people snorted. Someone whispered, "She's savage." Elizabeth slammed her note down. "You're humiliating us." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "You humiliated yourselves when you lied, when you used me, when you thought an old woman wouldn't notice $18,000 missing. Consider this my final lesson." The rest of dinner unfolded like a slow-motion storm. Elizabeth excused herself halfway through dessert, muttering something about needing air. Samuel stayed, silent and pale, staring at his plate. When the door closed behind her, I spoke quietly. "Samuel, you're still my son. I don't want your money. I don't want your guilt. I just want you to remember who raised you." He looked up, eyes glassy. "You were right, Mum, about everything." "I know," I said, my tone soft. "But knowing isn't enough. You need to be right next time." After everyone left, the house was quiet again. I cleaned the plates, humming softly to myself, when the doorbell rang. It was Elizabeth. Her eyes were swollen. Mascara streaked down her face. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked human. Not perfect, not posed, just tired. "I shouldn't have done what I did," she said. "But you embarrassed me." "No," I said gently. "You embarrassed yourself. I just held up the mirror." She looked down. "I guess I deserved that." "You did," I replied. "But I didn't do it to destroy you, Elizabeth. I did it so you'd stop destroying him." She blinked. "What do you mean?" I sighed. "Samuel has always been kind. Too kind. But he became small around you. Smaller than I've ever seen him. You dimmed his light, and he let you. But that ends now." Tears welled in her eyes. "You think I'm that bad?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. A week later, I received a small package. Inside was a handwritten note and a photo. Samuel and Elizabeth, standing in front of a local shelter, handing over a donation check. Her handwriting was shaky but heartfelt. "You were right. We've both been blind. Thank you for opening our eyes, even if it hurt. We're starting over." I stared at that photo for a long time. The same woman who had mocked me behind fake smiles was now volunteering at a shelter. The same son who had once lied to me was now trying to build something real. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real. And sometimes real is better than perfect. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the first snowfall of the season. The white flakes danced under the lamplight like forgiveness in slow motion. I realized something then. Revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it's about correction, about giving people the space to see themselves clearly, even if it takes a mirror made of consequences. I smiled softly to myself and whispered, "Lesson delivered."
6 months passed after that unforgettable dinner, the night the air cracked with truths no one could unsay. Winter had melted into a soft, forgiving spring. The snow that once covered my garden like silence had given way to daffodils, wild and unapologetic, much like me. For the first time in years, my house didn't feel empty. It felt quiet, but in a good way. The kind of quiet that means peace, not loneliness. Every morning, I brewed my tea, sat by the window, and watched the light fall across the porch. The same porch where I had once cried over that cruel photograph of the cruise. Now I smiled when I remembered it. It wasn't bitterness anymore. It was closure. A knock on the door startled me one Thursday afternoon. When I opened it, Samuel stood there, holding a bouquet of yellow tulips, my favorite. "Hi, Mom," he said, almost shy. I hadn't seen him since that night at dinner. His eyes looked softer, lighter, as if something heavy had finally been put down. I stepped aside. "Come in, Samuel." He entered, glancing around as if expecting ghosts to jump out from the corners. But there were none, just the scent of baked apple pie cooling on the counter. "Pie?" I asked, smiling. He laughed, a little awkwardly. "You never change." "Not where it matters," I said. "So, tell me, how's everything?" He sat down, running a hand through his hair. "Different. Better. Elizabeth's been volunteering at the shelter every week. She says it helps her keep perspective. And he paused, exhaled. I started seeing a therapist to work through the guilt. I nodded slowly. "That's good, Samuel. Really good." He looked at me, eyes glassy. "I wanted to thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." My chest tightened. "You're my son. Loving you isn't optional." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't need filling. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and slid an envelope across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Something I should have done a long time ago," he said quietly. Inside was a check for $18,000, the exact amount I had given him. "I can't take this," I said. "You can," firmly. "Because it's not about the money. It's about respect. And I need you to know I finally understand the difference." I stared at him, really stared. The boy I'd raised was gone. In his place sat a man who had learned, painfully but honestly, what integrity costs and what it's worth. My eyes filled with tears I didn't bother to hide. "I'm proud of you, Samuel." He smiled through his own. I had a good teacher. A week later, I received another surprise, a thick, cream-colored envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a cruise brochure, the same line they'd gone on before, but this time there was a note attached. "We'd like you to come with us, Mom. This time, it's our treat. Love, Samuel and Elizabeth." I sat there for a long time, holding that note. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same sea that had once carried their betrayal was now offering a chance at forgiveness. But forgiveness, I realized, isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing peace over pain, understanding over resentment. So, I booked the ticket. Not out of obligation, but out of peace. The day we boarded the ship, I could feel eyes on me, from passengers, from staff, from my own memories. But I walked tall,
wearing my best sun hat, my favorite coral scarf, and a calmness that came from surviving storms far worse than the sea. Samuel and Elizabeth greeted me at the port, both a little nervous. Elizabeth hugged me first. Her voice trembled. I know it might take time, but I want to make things right. I pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. You already started. We spent that first evening on deck, watching the sunset over the water. The same water that had once divided us. This time, it felt like it was carrying us somewhere new. That night, the ship hosted a small gala. Live music, champagne, soft laughter echoing through the night air. As the band played a slow tune, Samuel stood up and offered me his hand. "Dance with me, Mom?" I laughed. "Oh, you'll regret it. I'm rusty." He smiled. "Then we'll be rusty together." We danced. Clumsy, imperfect, real. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since before the lies, before the heartbreak, before the cruise. Joy. Not the kind that's loud and glittering, but the quiet kind. The kind that sneaks up on you when you realize the war is over, and you survived. As the song faded, Samuel leaned close and whispered, "I'm sorry for every moment I made you feel small." I whispered back, "You didn't make me small, Samuel. You just forgot how big my love was." He smiled through tears. "You're incredible, Mom." I squeezed his hand. "No, I'm just finally done apologizing for being strong."
The next morning, I woke early and walked out to the deck alone. The horizon stretched endlessly, golden, infinite, forgiving. I took a deep breath and thought of everything that had led me here, the betrayal, the rage, the lesson, the healing. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the victim of someone's selfishness. I felt like the author of my own story. That's when I realized revenge isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about reclamation, taking back the parts of yourself that pain tried to steal. I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind, "Thank you for everything, even the hurt, because without it, I wouldn't have found my peace." If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Remember, kindness doesn't make you weak. It makes you powerful enough to choose peace when others choose pain. And when people take your generosity for granted, don't fight them with anger. Show them what they lost by walking away with grace. I'm Hannah Smith, and this was my story of betrayal, of silence, and of revenge served not with cruelty, but with calm. If you felt something from this story, hit that subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from. Because sometimes sharing stories like this reminds someone else out there that even heartbreak can bloom into healing.